Hey guys, tonight we slip into our softest sandals and wander through the heat-soaked heart of ancient Rome, not to see the Colosseum's famous blood sport, but to uncover the far less glamorous and far more soothing tale of the people tasked with watching others nap. Yes, the nap monitors. Picture this. You're one of thousands crammed shoulder to shoulder under a heavy sun, with the smell of roasted chickpeas and sweaty leather sandals all around. Trumpets blare, lions roar, and someone near you is snoring. That's right. Because not every moment in the Colosseum was a dramatic sword clash or a lion mauling someone's cousin. Sometimes it was just hot and long and, well, boring. So boring, in fact, that a whole sleepy subculture emerged. You probably won't survive this in today's HR environment, but back then, people were hired to make sure you could take a good nap during a public execution. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're falling asleep from now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past a crumbling fountain, stepping lightly to avoid uneven cobblestones, and the looming bulk of the Colosseum curves into view like a half-eaten donut of stone. It's surprisingly quiet here, this early in the day. No roars, no rush. Just the rhythmic creak of a vendor wheeling stale honey cakes, and the occasional splash of mop water in the corridors. You're here early on purpose. Nap monitors rise. Before dawn, your guide is an older man named Servius. He has precisely the energy of someone who's been supervising sleep for 30 years. His sandals are worn, his tunic smells faintly of fennel tea and dust, and his eyes squint constantly, even in shade, as if he's always peering through a veil of dreams. Ah, he says, not even looking at you, new recruit. Yes, or just here to gawk. You smile awkwardly, but he's already turning, motioning for you to follow. Through an archway, the grand oval of the arena yawns wide. Sunlight pools on the seats like spilled gold, and the stone radiates a sleepy kind of warmth. This, Servius explains, is when nap monitors do their pre-check. We look for the good shade pockets, he mutters. We sweep for rats, too. Nothing ruins a nap like a nibble. As you make your way around the perimeter, you begin to notice the tools of the trade. Notepads made of wax tablets. Wooden sticks soft-tipped for gentle prodding. Small pouches of dried lavender. A bell with a cracked handle used to signal not emergencies, but the start of quiet hours. And over in the upper ring, a girl, no older than 14, carefully arranges folded cloths over a sun-warmed bench. For the elderly nappers, Servius says, nodding with what could almost be pride, the Colosseum, as you're beginning to realize, wasn't just a stage for spectacle. It was a marathon, an endurance test of patience. Events often stretched across days, and while emperors might enter dramatically in gilded chariots, the people around them were just trying to survive the heat and sometimes boredom without passing out from dehydration or rage. So they leaned back, pulled their tunics over their eyes, and drifted. Historians still argue whether the concept of nap monitoring was ever formalized by decree or simply a practical role that emerged over time. But archaeological scraps, scratched names on seatbacks, doodles of sleeping, faces beside tally marks hint at an unofficial but consistent presence of sleep. Supervision. The nap monitors didn't enforce rest. They curated it. They watched for restlessness, fanned the elderly, and sometimes even provided calming commentary that gladiators left-handed. One might whisper to a nervous viewer as swords clashed far below, "But don't worry. He's also clumsy." Comfort, it turns out, was part of the Colosseum experience. One odd fact: there's evidence that some monitors tracked the snoring of regular attendees. A kind of proto-sleep data collection. Clay tags bearing nicknames like Grumblerus or Snortius Maximus have been found near the cheap seats. It was a game, Servius tells you, scratching his chin. Who could sleep the longest without being poked? Or, who fell asleep the fastest during the opening fanfare? Of course, not everyone appreciated the nap monitors. Some saw them as meddlers, joy-stealers. One scroll fragment details a monitor being pelted with figs by a young boy who didn't want his father to miss a dramatic beheading. Another poem sarcastically praised them as dream shepherds of the arena, which may or may not have been flattering, depending on how you interpret ancient sarcasm. You pass a carved relief halfway up the corridor wall. It shows a reclining figure, mouth open in sleep, with a smaller figure standing nearby holding what appears to be a feather. That, Servius says, was Flavia, the most famous nap monitor of her time. Tickle artist, they called her. Never once woke a man from slumber, even when a lion escaped. You don't ask how the lion incident ended. Instead, you pause on the upper tier, looking down at the stillness of the center stage. Right now, it's empty, but you can imagine it. The roaring crowd, the sand soaked in drama, the shuffling of attendants. And somewhere among them, a quiet figure standing still, eyes half-lidded, scanning for slouched shoulders and peaceful faces. The nap monitor, it's strangely reassuring. Even in one of history's most brutal arenas, there was someone making sure your neighbor didn't drool on your toga. You follow Servius deeper into the corridors of the Colosseum, your sandals making a soft whisper against the ancient stone. The air is cool in here, and you imagine it's a welcome break for spectators seeking both shade and serenity during the hotter portions of the day. Up ahead, there's a small alcove with a stone bench worn smooth by generations of Roman backsides. Servius gestures to it as he mutters, "This was a favorite nap corner. Prime acoustics. You could hear nothing." As strange as it seems now, the Colosseum wasn't all constant roaring crowds and theatrical executions. The spectacle was spaced out. A morning beast hunt, an hour of speeches, an awkward break while someone dragged out props for a historical reenactment of a naval battle. Then, maybe a mid-afternoon break for snacks and silence. There were lulls, sometimes long ones, and Romans, being practical people, took those lulls as opportunities for quick naps. You squeeze between columns and re-enter the sunlight on the eastern side of the arena, where a group of workers is draping canvas awnings Valeria across the top rows. Their movement casts big, fluttering shadows across the marble. Servius watches for a moment, then says, "That's the good nap light, filtered, gentle, not the harsh kind that bakes you in your seat." Back in the first few centuries CE, finding peace in the Colosseum was its own kind of survival skill. The shows weren't like modern movies, tight and focused and over in 90 minutes. They were all-day endurance events. Bring your water jug. Bring your friend. maybe bring your knitting. And if a few prisoners were getting eaten alive by panthers down below, well, no reason you couldn't relax your eyes for a bit. There's an old Roman saying, rarely quoted today, that translates roughly to, only fools miss a nap for a sword fight. Historians still debate how accurate that sentiment was, but there's no denying that naps were part of the rhythm. Life in Rome was hot, hectic, and heavy with ceremony. The Colosseum, for all its reputation as a place of violence, was also a kind of public living room. People came not just to be thrilled, but to pass the time, to gather, to snack, to gossip, and for the weary, to doze. You lean against a low wall as Servius continues. Some people came just to sleep. They didn't care about the games. They liked the breeze, the stone, the noise oddly soothing from a distance. You ever nap to distant yelling? It's like ocean waves. If the ocean was angry and slightly drunk, even emperors weren't immune to the slower moments. A popular and possibly exaggerated story tells of Emperor Claudius dozing off during a particularly tedious series of reenacted sea battles. Rather than wake him, a nearby attendant simply adjusted a fan to block the sun from his face. When he finally stirred, the crowd cheered not because he'd missed anything exciting, but because they respected a good nap when they saw one. And then there were the props. Not the flaming chariots or paper match temples, though those were around too, but the everyday comforts, fans made of peacock feathers, cushions stitched with faded names, and, for the very wealthy, reclining benches imported from their villas. One aristocratic woman whose name has been lost to time but whose perfume recipes survive was said to attend gladiator games solely for the atmosphere, reclining under a lilac-scented shawl and sipping goat's milk infused with poppy. People like her, Servius says, didn't need the action. They liked the spectacle of being at the spectacle. It was very fashionable to pretend to watch and then quietly drift off. It's here, in these small comforts, that the role of the nap monitor became essential. Without someone maintaining order, keeping the walkway clear of sprawled limbs, ensuring nobody rolled into someone else's date or picnic, it would have turned into a chaotic pile of sweaty legs and dropped water skins. A good nap monitor knew how to navigate sleeping crowds with grace. A great one could restore calm after a startled snore triggered 3 rows of wake-ups. In fact, one fringe theory suggests that nap monitors had their own form of silent communication: finger taps, foot nudges, tiny whistles pitched so low only fellow monitors could hear them. It's not proven, but a few scratched notes in the margins of military manuals hint at similar systems. Who's to say a sleepy whisper network didn't run beneath the games? You pause at a food vendor's stall. It's empty now, but Servius gestures at the faded signage: dates, almonds, little bowls of barley stew. That, he says, was the true sleep inducer. Half the people slept, not from boredom, but from being full. You think watching someone fight a bear is intense. Try doing it after 3 servings of warm lentils. It's not hard to imagine. A humid afternoon, a rumbling stomach now quieted by food, the far-off clang of blades, a soft seat under your backside, and the buzz of idle voices surrounding you. Your eyelids droop. The show continues, but you're in your own little dream world, somewhere far away from sand and blood and noise. Even gladiators were aware of the nap breaks. Some, according to surviving training records, timed their flashiest moves to the hour right before most people fell asleep, just to ensure they weren't forgotten. Others developed reputations for putting crowds to sleep unintentionally. 1 man, a heavily armored fighter known as Plumbum Maximus Lead Guy, was so slow and lumbering that the phrase "he's gone full plumbum" became shorthand for "I've lost interest." You chuckle softly at that one, and Servius nods. Some fighters hated nap time, took it personally, but most accepted it. You can't fight fatigue. There's a quiet grace in all this, a reminder that even amidst grandeur and brutality, humans still needed rest, and where there were naps, there were those entrusted to keep them safe. A strange kind of guardianship, yes, but a gentle one. You feel it now too, a drowsiness creeping in around the edges. Maybe it's the rhythm of Servius's footsteps, or the endless curve of the arena, or just the idea of hundreds of years of naps layered into the stones around you. Either way, you let yourself breathe deep and slow, imagining how many others once did the same. Right here under the Roman sun, Servius leads you toward a shaded stairwell that winds through the Colosseum's underbelly. The air down here smells of clay and old wool, and the walls drip with the echoes of centuries. You trail a finger along the rough surface of the stone, wondering how many sandals have shuffled this same path, how many half-asleep Romans stumbled down here in search of somewhere slightly less dramatic than the arena floor. It's quiet, deliberately so. This was the realm of the drowsy overseers. At a small wooden door, Servius knocks twice, pauses, then pushes it open with a sigh. Inside is a dimly lit room with faded frescoes of pastoral scenes: hills, sheep, a man napping under a tree. The irony isn't subtle. A group of people, mostly older men and women in beige tunics, sit in mismatched chairs, sipping watered wine from clay mugs. One is snoring gently into his elbow. These are your first real nap monitors. Don't let the look fool you, Servius says, waving his hand across the room. They might seem like a group of sleepy librarians, but they've stopped more nap-related chaos than any legion ever did. You take a seat and listen as the group discusses the day's assignments. Someone's on upper-tier duty light, fussy kids. Another is stationed near the vendor's classic post-snack slump zone. A third is handling the imperial box, which has its own set of challenges. Mainly the nobles who insist on dozing with a fanboy waving a palm frond at all times. You get the sense there's a hierarchy here. The best nap monitors work the noisiest sections, the ones closest to the action. They've trained themselves to spot signs of fading consciousness, even during thunderous applause. A cocked head, a slack jaw, the telltale twitch of an ankle, these are the signals they watch for. And when they strike, the monitor pounces. Very gently. First rule of nap work, one woman named Unia murmurs, setting her mug down. Don't wake the sleeper, ever. Redirect the chaos around them. Reroute foot traffic. Hush the vendors, but let the nap continue. It's a job with finesse. She describes a moment last month when a man fell asleep right as a stunt team began reenacting the siege of Syracuse with pyrotechnics and trumpet blasts. Unia had 5 seconds to gather 3 linen cloaks, a food tray, and 2 apprentices, then construct a sound barrier just high enough to shield the sleeper's ears. He never stirred. I got a grape bunch for that one, she says, smiling faintly. From his wife, these stories are more frequent than you expect. Apparently, quiet coordination among nap monitors was almost a form of performance art. There were duels happening on sand while an entire upper row of spectators snoozed peacefully, thanks to carefully angled canvas, a distraction musician, and someone shaking a tambourine exactly offbeat to mask a nearby sneeze. And they didn't work alone. Nap monitors coordinated with ushers, vendors, even the animal keepers. If someone nearby was particularly exhausted, a well-placed delay in releasing the lions could grant them an extra 20 minutes of rest. Historians still argue whether nap monitoring counted as a formal guild, or if it remained one of Rome's many quiet trades, unrecognized but essential. There are whispers that one emperor, possibly Antoninus Pius, granted a group of nap monitors honorary status after he was able to sleep uninterrupted during a 10-hour poetry contest. The official record is fuzzy, but the legend lives on. Servius shifts in his seat and mutters about a time he had to babysit 2 toddlers whose parents fell asleep during an afternoon show. They were trying to feed honey cakes to a bronze statue, he sighs. I let them. It kept them quiet. Not all nap monitors were elderly or invisible. Some were surprisingly well known. A man named Hilarion, known for his soothing voice and lullaby-like commentary, became famous in the upper sections. People requested seats near him not for the view, but for the guaranteed nap zone he created. He once got a standing ovation for helping an entire bachelorette party fall asleep after a rowdy entrance. Even the equipment had a cult following. Soft-tipped wands made of olive wood. Silence bells tuned so low you could feel the vibration more than hear it. Herbal satchels designed to mask the stink of roasted onions or gladiator sweat. You're handed one of these, a little cloth pouch, tied with string. Inside, dried mint, chamomile, and crushed fennel seeds. Our greatest tool, Unia says, next to patience. A quirky tidbit. Nap monitors trained by practicing on goats. Apparently, Roman goats are notoriously light sleepers, and if you could sneak up, fan one for 10 minutes, and walk away without waking it, you were ready for people. There's a mural somewhere near Pompeii that shows this, though it's been partially scratched out by someone who apparently took goat training very seriously. Your lead outside again, up a narrow staircase that deposits you in the lower rows of the audience seating. The sun's higher now, baking the upper levels and warming the stone underfoot. A few early guests have trickled in, mostly elderly men with thick eyebrows and serious sandals. One of them yawns just as he reaches his seat. Servius raises a finger. Watch this. Sure enough, before the man can even recline fully, a young monitor silently slips down the aisle, adjusts a cushion behind his back, and places a small folded cloth over the seat edge so he doesn't scuff his toga. No words, no eye contact. Just a nod. Perfect form, Servius murmurs, almost wistfully. There's something strange, but sweet, about it all. In the middle of Rome's noisiest venue, the most overlooked professionals were the ones making sure people could find peace. You begin to realize the Colosseum wasn't just a monument to drama and excess. It was also, in its own eccentric way, a monument to rest, to comfort, to napping under pressure. You tilt your head back and feel the sun drift across your face. Somewhere in the rows above, someone is already snoring, and just out of sight, Someone else is making sure they stay asleep. You wake just a little. A cool breeze floats across the lower seating tiers. The sun's glare has softened now, and the shade is slowly stretching across the stone, inviting drowsy souls to surrender to it. Beside you, Servius leans forward and chuckles softly. This is when the real action starts, not on the sand, but in the seats. He points discreetly at a man with his arms folded, his chin resting on his chest, mouth slightly open in peaceful oblivion. A veteran napper. This, as it turns out, was not only tolerated in the Colosseum, it was at one point encouraged, especially under the reign of emperors who valued the long form of public games as a kind of Roman theater, multi-act drawn out, and often, let's be honest, very repetitive. Emperors like Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius were known for scheduling these events to serve as both entertainment and civic bonding time. But even they knew that after 3 hours of flaming ostriches and poorly choreographed reenactments of ancient battles, people needed a nap. And some emperors like Antoninus Pius believed a well-rested audience was a content one. Servius shrugs. Let them nap, and they won't complain about the tax increases. Indeed, there are records from a few surviving imperial decrees that suggest certain sections of the seating were unofficially designated as quiet zones. These were the higher tiers, the cooler rows, often attended by elderly citizens or dignitaries who couldn't be seen yawning during a public beheading. Some of the best nap monitors were stationed in these rows, tasked not with keeping people awake, but with guarding their rest. At one point, rumor has it that a group of senators lobbied for an official postprandial rest interval during festival weeks, a fancy way of saying nap time between acts. While the Senate never codified it formally, the practice seems to have taken root. Monitors began marking time with small sand-filled hourglasses, and a red ribbon was sometimes tied around the perimeter of the top-tier seats to indicate a no-noise zone. You pass one of these ceremonial ribbons, now faded and fraying with age, tucked behind a display in a small side exhibit. Servius dusts it off. We used to joke this was the emperor's personal do not disturb line. Some monitors even experimented with techniques to help people fall asleep faster. One of the more bizarre trends, something called the lemon wheel method. You raise an eyebrow, and Servius smiles, clearly enjoying the anticipation. They'd take dried citrus peels, he explains, and bind them around the rim of a chariot wheel. Then they'd set the wheel spinning slowly near the edge of a breezeway. The rotation would release a soft scent and make a faint whirry noise, kind of like a fan. This strange invention was meant to soothe the nervous crowd during particularly tense games. The aroma, combined with the rhythmic sound, lulled people into a relaxed state. Worked better than lullabies, Servius claims, though there's a twinkle of mischief in his eye. Historians still argue whether this odd ritual ever caught on broadly or remained the quirk of a few inventive sleep enthusiasts. But one poem attributed to a minor Roman playwright describes the citrus wheel of the gods, lulling an entire row of patricians into an unplanned group nap, just before a crocodile was released into the arena. An unfortunate timing error, perhaps, but an effective sleep aid. Nonetheless, you make your way down toward the arena floor, where preparations are underway for a mock sea battle. Workers haul buckets of water, dragging canvas sheets and watertight planks into place to simulate shallow waves. It's loud, a little chaotic, and the smell of wet hay fills the air. Now Servius says, "You'd think this would be the part that kept everyone awake. But you'd be wrong." He guides you to the shaded side of the arena, where rows of benches face away from the sun. Right here, prime nap spot during the naval shows. People liked the sloshing water sounds, said it reminded them of bath. The shows themselves could last hours. The water rarely reached past the knees, and the drama often felt more like theater camp than battle. So many spectators took the opportunity to lie back and close their eyes while gladiator rowers fake shouted about sinking triremes, and in these moments, nap monitors became something closer to ushers at a sleepover. They handed out rolled-up straw mats. They passed around soft herb-scented compresses for neck aches. One monitor even compiled a handwritten guidebook of recommended reclining postures by audience tier, fragments of which survive on pottery shards unearthed near Ostia. A quirky anecdote. One monitor, nicknamed Bibulus the Blanket, was said to carry an oversized cloak that he would spread over couples who had dozed off in each other's arms. The act became so iconic that vendors began selling mini cloaks labeled Bibulus Specials. And for a short time, the emperor himself was gifted one during a festival week. You step back into the corridor, watching as a small group of spectators shuffle in with sleepy expressions. A mother balances a child on her hip. An older man pulls out a small, cushioned pad and places it with ceremonial care on his favorite seat. Behind them, a nap monitor already waits in the aisle, holding a soft stick with a carved owl on top, the universal Roman symbol for quiet. You sit for a moment and let it all sink in. This world, so often described as brutal and loud, had its soft edges, its caretakers of calm, its guardians of rest. While lions roared and swords clanged, someone was there to pass out linen, adjust a pillow, or gently nudge a snorer, just enough to stop the buzzing, but not enough to wake them. In modern times, we might laugh at the idea of state-sponsored naps at a public death match. But Rome wasn't always about conquest and pageantry. Sometimes, it was about making it through the afternoon heat without melting into your toga. And for that, the nap monitors were invaluable. You lean back again, letting your eyes close briefly. The hum of preparation fades into the background. Somewhere nearby, a wheel creaks. A monitor hums softly. And for just a second, you understand why so many people came here, not to cheer, not to gawk, but to nap, safely and completely, in the company of thousands. As the crowd thickens and the heat settles in, you follow Servius toward a quiet roped-off section of the Colosseum's upper tiers. These seats are deeper, their cushions better, preserved, clearly not your average peasant's perch. This, he says with a raised brow, is where things got ... competitive. He taps the stone beside one particularly plush seat. This was bribed. You blink at him. Bribed? Oh, absolutely, he says, walking slowly along the row. There were entire conspiracies around seating. People slipped coins to ushers, winked at attendants, promised a favor to a senator's cousin's neighbor, all to score one of the prime nap spots. It turns out that among Rome's elite, comfort during the games was a form of status. And not just comfort, the ability to nap luxuriously during a chaotic lion chase below was the ultimate expression of wealth. If you could sleep through that, it meant you had it made. Some high-ranking Romans even brought their own nap attendants. These were personal slaves or servants who carried custom-made cushions, perfumed cloths, and even folding recliners. Yes, recliners built from cedar wood and overstuffed with goose feathers. The whole thing looked more like a traveling spa than a Colosseum setup. One senator named Lucius Fabius Secundus famously paid an entire chariot team not to race, but to form a wall with their vehicles, creating a shaded wind-blocking barrier around his private seat. He then reclined with a chilled goblet of mulled wine and dozed through an elephant stampede. The story made the rounds for years. Satirists wrote biting poems. Commoners reenacted the scene with wicker carts and donkeys at festivals. Historians still argue whether the cushioned bench conspiracies were widespread or limited to the top 1%, but references to them show up enough in graffiti and letters that it's hard to dismiss. One scrawl, still visible on the lower promenade, reads, "May your seat be hard and your cushions stolen." Probably written by someone stuck next to a snorer with a deluxe nap kit. You walk a little farther with Servius, and come upon a small door half concealed in the wall. Behind it lies a shadowy space with slanted stone walls, a tiny window, and a floor covered in what else? Linen padding. Unofficial nap zone, he whispers, bribed into existence. Apparently, these hidden cubbies became secret sanctuaries for Rome's napping elite, reserved through whispers and exchanged favors. They were rarely spoken of publicly. Some even had painted ceilings of night skies to help the mind drift faster. There's one popular tale about a noblewoman who hired a local artist to paint her nap nook with clouds and stars, then claimed she could only sleep if the moon in the painting was aligned with the real one in the sky. But of course, Servius grumbles, she also snored like a walrus. You chuckle, imagining this painted cocoon of serenity, echoing with noble snores, while gladiators shouted below. It's somehow fitting. Then come the awnings Valeria again, but this time not the standard ones. No, these were privately commissioned canopies woven with embroidered stars, peacock feathers, even gold thread. Some were scented, a favorite among the upper crust. Cloaks soaked in rosewater and eucalyptus, raised above the head like parasols. Nap monitors in these sections had to wear matching robes and speak only in whispers. It was less a nap zone and more a wellness ritual. And for those who couldn't bribe their way into shade, there were bacchanal stories. A bound of people pretending to faint from heat just to be moved into the shade for medical reasons. One man, according to a particularly gossipy letter from a minor poet, carried a bottle of sheep's blood under his tunic and poured it on his forehead during a lull in the games. The ruse worked. He was carted off to a shaded area and promptly began snoring. Quirky, absolutely. But it reveals something deeper about ancient Rome. Despite all its harshness, its hunger for violence and display, the average Roman still cared very deeply about getting a good nap. It was a human moment tucked into the madness of empire.nap. Monitors weren't exempt from the drama either. They had to patrol these bribed zones carefully, making sure no one overstepped their allotted space or spilled wine on someone else's imported pillow. There were turf wars, quiet ones. Someone spreading too far across a bench. Someone else trying to edge a cushion into another family's shadow line. You might think a nap zone is peaceful, but the politics of sleeping arrangements, absolutely cutthroat. One fringe tidbit. some cushions came with tokens sewn inside them, like personalized nap coins, exchanged between friends or lovers. For your next rest, one token inscription read, another simply said, "You sleep." Like a poet, dreamy and loud, archaeologists still find these little clay discs in odd corners of the seating rows. Some even had tiny holes drilled through them, as if they were meant to be worn napped badges, perhaps. You lean against the stone wall, letting it warm your back as you imagine the scene, high-born Romans bribing their way to fluffy naps, monitors guarding their territory with passive-aggressive precision, cushions being fluffed like sacred relics. It's absurd. And somehow, entirely believable. Servius, ever-practical sighs. That's the thing about comfort, he says. Once someone has it, they'll fight to keep it even if they're asleep. And here in the Colosseum, even among roaring beasts and thunderous applause, a corner of Rome fought gently but fiercely for the softest seat and the longest nap. And someone quiet, observant, and deeply patient was always there, watching over them. Back out in the sun, the Colosseum shimmers like a stone mirage. Servius wipes his brow with a handkerchief that looks older than most emperors, then motions for you to follow. Let's go to the lower east corridor, he says. That's where the lemon wheel fans started, but it's also where the weirdest method took off. You raise an eyebrow. Oh yes, he chuckles. The lemon wheel. Sleep method was just the beginning. Romans love a trend, especially one that doesn't work, but sounds clever. This next method, it involved chariot wheels again, but in a more interactive way. People would sprinkle a ring of citrus peels, usually lemon, sometimes orange, a small spinning chariot wheel. They believed the continuous rotation and smell would hypnotize their senses into a light nap. Supposedly, the gentle creak of the wood, the wafting citrus oil, and the soft clinking of attached bronze charms created the ideal lullaby for the overwhelmed Roman. One satirical play from the period referred to this as the Wheel of Forgetting. And in the script, a character falls asleep so soundly next to one that he misses his own execution. Tragic, Servius says dryly, but aromatic. Historians still argue whether this was a fad or a full-on phenomenon. Some say it originated in Etruscan healing rituals and was later adopted by wealthier Romans seeking holistic rest. Others think it was just an elaborate inside joke that got out of hand, like a sleepier version of modern detox teas. But perhaps most curious was how seriously some nap monitors took these odd methods. One woman, named Claudia Sabina, catalogued over 20 nap atmospheres, including the lemon breeze, the cumin drift, and the particularly controversial musk of Mars, which involved hanging bits of gladiator tunic soaked in sweat above one's seat. The latter didn't catch on widely, for reasons that become clear the longer you think about it. Still, you find a certain charm in all this. People desperately trying to fall asleep while death matches unfold below, armed with citrus peels and goat hair sachets, all in pursuit of serenity. A kind of sleepy optimism. As you walk deeper into the belly of the arena, you notice small alcoves with murals, some intact, some chipped to near nothing. One shows a man gently fanning a woman, while a battle rages behind them. Another depicts a monitor leaning on a large stick, eyes half closed, looking more asleep than the people he's supposed to supervise. Servius laughs. That's luscious. Legend says he once napped during his entire shift, but no one noticed because Everyone else was asleep too. Whether true or not, Lartius has become a kind of folk hero among nap monitors. His likeness appears in graffiti, often drawn with giant ears, possibly a nod to his reputation as someone who could hear a yawn 3 rows away. You round a corner into a storage room filled with oddities. Stacks of worn cushions, bundles of dried herbs, and yes, 3 surviving lemon wheels. Each one is about the size of a dinner plate, carved with tiny glyphs of eyes closed in sleep. One still faintly smells like citron and beeswax. People would rent them for the day, Servius says, running his fingers across the wheel's edge. Sometimes they'd spin them in pairs, for stereo effect. In another crate, you find rolled scrolls. These are nap logs. Yes, nap logs. Some monitors, ever the meticulous types, documented the sleep habits of regular attendees. You read entries like, second bench from the Westman with green sash snored after second trumpet blast. Stirred briefly during the wolf parade. Slept again. Or, woman with braided hair light doze for 40 minutes. Woke briefly, requested mint oil, resumed sleep. It's fascinating. A civilization so often celebrated for its aggression, its roads, its conquests. Yet here are the notes of people who noticed dreams, tracked rest, curated silence. And there were techniques, too. Nap monitors trained in progressive recline, gently guiding seated nappers into safer, more comfortable positions. They used padded rods to reposition limbs, redistribute weight, and gently press pressure points to prevent stiff joints or accidental drooling on neighbors. There's even evidence, though it's debated, that they held mini workshops. How to nap without snoring, breathing like a sleeping centurion, cushion arranging for maximum lethargy. Probably more community theater than medical science, but still. The commitment is impressive. A quirky tidbit comes from a fragment of graffiti found near the vendor halls. It reads, "He who spins the lemon wheel backward dreams of goats. Make of that what you will." Servius leads you back up into the sunlight, pausing to let you rest on the warm stone. The noise has risen now, drums chatter, the low growl of animals preparing for the next act. But somehow, the rhythm of the crowd feels soothing. Now imagine, Servius says, gesturing at the people already seated, you've been here for hours. You've seen a juggler drop flaming swords, a reenacted battle involving 47 fake Spartans, and you've eaten 2 bags of honeyed almonds. You're full. The sun's warm. The crowd hums. You close your eyes, and someone's watching not to stop you, but to make sure the dream lasts. That's what nap monitors did. They weren't just attendants. They were curators of rest, gentle facilitators of forgetfulness. The Colosseum may have been a monument to spectacle, but somewhere, amid the shouting and sand, there were people spinning citrus wheels, adjusting shoulders, and writing tiny notes about snoring patterns. You close your eyes for a moment and hear only the soft rustling of canvas above. Maybe you do dream of goats. The sunlight has shifted now, angling in from the west, turning the Colosseum's inner corridors gold and shadowed. You and Servius walk in silence for a bit. There's something about this place, this steady hum of heat and history, that encourages quiet. Your feet trace the same grooves worn into the stone by centuries of sandals. and the worn patterns in the floor are a reminder. You are not the first to drift, dazed and full-bellied, through this maze of echoing arches. Servius stops suddenly, pointing to an odd little cubicle near the back of one of the upper promenades. It's about the size of a wardrobe, wedged between two columns, and curtained off with a threadbare velvet drape. The complaint booth, he says, straight-faced. You squint. Surely he's joking. But he continues, back in the mid-2nd century, there was a rash of nap disturbances, horn players warming up too loudly, young spectators throwing pebbles, vendors yelling about olives during someone's REM cycle. So someone came up with this an anonymous Dropbox for sleep complaints. You write it down, slip it through the slot, and it gets reviewed by, well, whoever was bored enough. You peek inside. A dusty wooden box with a cracked lid sits on a little shelf. Faint scratchings around the slot indicate heavy using fingers, perhaps. A few old fragments remain, crumpled and forgotten at the bottom. To the boy in row J, if you kick the back of my bench one more time, I shall release bees. Vendor Marcus, please stop singing. It is not helping digestion, nor dreams. Bring 3 cushions. I leave with 2. This is a problem. You laugh softly, and Servius smiles. Rome may have had gladiators, but nothing provoked real fury like a stolen pillow. Nap monitors took these notes seriously. Some even created a nightly patrol routine. They'd inspect the usual trouble spots, carry extra cloths, and place soft zones in areas where people had lodged repeated complaints. They'd move noisy vendors further down the row, or offer stern finger wags to particularly fidgety teenagers. In time, nap monitor training expanded to include dispute resolution. It wasn't uncommon for 2 people to argue over seat shade, foot space, or who had the right to lean where. The monitors had to settle it calmly, using only hand gestures and polite nods, lest they wake the other dozen people nearby who had successfully nodded off. Sometimes, Servius says, the whole row would sigh if a loud talker entered, like a gust of collective disappointment. He mimes it now, 12 people sighing in slow, coordinated disapproval. It probably worked better than any actual reprimand. Historians still argue whether these disputes were serious social fractures or just momentary irritations in a culture obsessed with decorum. But there's no doubt that Roman etiquette valued silent suffering and subtle revenge. A misplaced cushion might result in the passive-aggressive shifting of sandals. An overly loud wine pour could lead to someone relocating their loudest snorer beside you next time. Even public performances weren't immune. Poets and orators knew to time their readings for non-nap hours. An infamous incident involved a young senator delivering a passionate speech on civic virtue during a lull in the gladiator fights right, as most of the crowd was mid-napped. Not only was he ignored, but someone reportedly tossed a half-eaten fig at him. The fig became legendary. Senator less so. Some monitors developed reputations for their ability to quell disputes without ever speaking. One man, named Rufinus the Silent, was said to possess such powerful eye contact that he once ended a 7-person footrest argument with a single glance. Another, Lucilla the Stoic, was known for standing so still during drama that people mistook her for a quantil. She gently corrected a child's pillow alignment mid-play. And then there were the whisper chains. These were soft alerts. passed from monitor to monitor when a row became restless. A fluttered handkerchief, a rhythmic tap of a sandal, a glance followed by a nod. Within moments, monitors would appear with water cups, mint sachets, or just the calming presence of someone who understood the crisis, that someone's nap was about to be ruined. A quirky tidbit you pass now is the whisper corner, a wedge of seating tucked between two columns where monitors gathered during intermissions to coordinate. Rumor says one emperor, possibly the boy emperor Elagabalus, used to sneak into these meetings disguised in common robes, just to hear what people were really whispering about. If true, it might explain why, during one summer, the official game schedule included mandatory nap intervals and fan intermissions. You settle into one of the whisper corner's ancient benches. It's cool to the touch and slopes just enough to lull the spine into complacency. A soft breeze catches the hem of your tunic. Above, pigeons shuffle across the high arches, their sounds muffled into gentle coos. Somewhere, far off, a horn signals the beginning of another event, but here, it's distant, irrelevant. Servius sighs contentedly and speaks almost in a murmur. Some days, I'd come here just to watch people fall asleep. They'd resist at first, shift around, fidget, but then eyelids dip, mouths slacken, hands go still. It's beautiful, in a way. He's right. You think about the thousands, no, hundreds of thousands who must have slept here over the centuries. Romans napping with bellies full of garum and bread. Tourists from distant provinces snoozing through their first lion show. Children curled into grandparents, senators pretending to listen, lovers leaning on each other, using the sounds of battle as lullabies, and through it all, nap monitors walking quietly, carefully, making sure that for at least a few hours in this noisy empire, someone found peace. You breathe in slowly. The air smells like dust, lavender, and just a hint of distant popcorn, not historically accurate, but your brain is blending timelines now. That's okay. You're halfway to dreaming, just like the rest of them. The sunlight has cooled to a mellow amber now, and shadows stretch long across the Colosseum's corridors. You walk beside Servius through the arches of the north wing, where the air feels oddly chilled thick with memory. Maybe there's a hush to this section that feels earned, like a place that remembers every dream that ever drifted through its breeze. This was the domain of the elder nap monitors, not the active ones who darted between benches and whispered like wind, but the seasoned few who had retired from gentle vigilance and simply watched. You come to what looks like a meeting spot, a semicircle of smooth stone benches shaded by a crumbling awning. In the center stands a stubby marble pedestal, worn at the top by hundreds of resting elbows. The circle of slumber, Servius says with mock grandeur, a sacred place where former nap monitors gathered to swap the world's most boring war stories. One of the benches holds a faded inscription, barely legible, but you make out the phrase, "I once caught a sneeze before it happened." You nod respectfully. Legendary stuff. Servius sits and stretches his legs, resting one hand over his eyes. They were like monks, he murmurs. Monks of stillness. You couldn't rattle them. A panther could roar, and they wouldn't blink. They'd just nudge a cushion half an inch to the left, and continue sipping their broth. You listen, lulled again by the slow rhythm of his voice, and learn that these elder monitors had once run the most chaotic zone's lower east quadrant during midday bear fights, central tier during summer's peak snoring season, or worst of all, toddler alley. That was the bench of broken dreams, he whispers, pacifiers flying, sippy cups rolling like thunder. You haven't earned your cloak until you've lulled 6 toddlers through a chariot crash reenactment. One of the most respected elders was an old man named Marinus, often called the Pillow General. He developed the first formal grid system for napwatch zones and assigned monitors, based on rhythm compatibility, placing high-anxiety types in energetic zones and calm-hearted ones, where soft snores rose like incense. Historians still debate whether Marinus actually existed or was an amalgamation of several monitors with impressive resumes. But there's a stone tile not far from here with the outline of a reclining figure etched beside a cushion and a bunch of grapes. Coincidence? Maybe, but ask any monitor, and they'll say, that's Marinus. He once hushed a trumpet with a single breath. Nearby there's a wall carved with columns of names. Some are real, some perhaps ceremonial. These were the names of monitors who never missed a shift, not even once. In a city where gladiators bled and senators schemed, these were the ones who made sure nobody snored loud enough to disrupt an emperor's nap. You reach a shaded alcove tucked behind the elder benches. On its wall is a mural, faded but still legible, depicting a young monitor holding a scroll while surrounded by dozing figures. Above it reads a motto in Latin, Dormir tutus, vigilare serenus, sleep safely, watch gently. It's almost monastic, the care these people took. They didn't protect borders or battle legions, but their task was no less noble. They were defenders of calm in an empire of chaos. You imagine them moving slowly through crowds, nodding silently, their robes weighted with herbal sachets, and their sandals muffled with strips of linen to soften their steps. One hand always ready with a fan, the other with a blanket. A quirky tidbit. Some elder monitors carried small bells that didn't ring. They were just symbols of service, like a soldier's badge or a merchant's stamp. These bells, known as dormina, were made of silver and designed to chime only in dreams. Of course, they didn't really, but if someone was drifting off and heard a faint tingling, well, who's to say it wasn't the bell? You spot one of these tucked in a small shrine, mounted to the wall under a tiny ledge of stone offerings. A wilted lavender stem, a folded cloth, a clay token etched with a closed eye. The respect is palpable. Even in death, nap monitors were honored. Some were buried with cushions, others with strips of their monitoring cloaks. One tomb inscription famously read, "Here lies Flavia, who watched over 1,426 naps. Never once did she wake a soul." That's legacy. Servius exhales deeply, his eyes half-lidded as he gazes into the flickering shadows. "It wasn't glamorous," he says, "but it mattered. You wouldn't believe how many people came here not for the games, but for the peace, the gentle breeze, the comfort of knowing someone would tap your toe if your head fell too far forward." He leans back and adds, "Nap monitors were like living lullabies. The quiet hum in the background of Rome." You sit in silence for a while, the two of you watching sunlight slide across the stone like a slow yawn. You hear the wind shuffle a curtain, a pigeon coos softly in the rafters. Someone coughs faintly 3 tiers above, then goes quiet again. Time blurs. There's no sense of urgency, no press of spectacle. Just the ghostly comfort of people who once stood exactly where you do now. Eyes watchful, hearts calm, hands gently guiding others toward dreams. The Colosseum was not just an arena of conquest, it was a sanctuary for sleepers, a temple for nappers. A colossus of calm amidst the thunder. And through all of it the games, the blood, the applause, there were the watchers, the whisperers, the quiet ones, making sure that rest, that rare and sacred thing, was never interrupted. You don't need to speak. You just sit a while longer, listening for bells that don't ring. By now, the Colosseum has shifted into its evening rhythm. The heat has broken. A cooler breeze curls through the arches, lifting the edges of tunics and causing every flame-lit torch to dance with a lazy sway. The noise, once constant and pulsing, has softened into murmurs and footsteps gentler now, as if the whole place is preparing to yawn. Even the lions seem quieter, their roars turned to low grumbles. And the vendors are no longer shouting about roasted walnuts but instead exchanging gossip in half-sentences. Servius leads you up a narrow spiral staircase near the southern wall. The steps are uneven and worn like old teeth, but at the top after several turns and one very reluctant knee you reach a perch. It isn't grand or spacious. Just a platform with 3 wooden benches and a view that catches everything. The arena, the crowd, even the last sliver of sunset painting the far rim of the stone in honey-colored light. This was the Watcher's Loft, Servius says, settling onto a bench, where the lead nap monitor would stand. You sit beside him, legs stretched out, and stare at the fading gold spread across the stone tiers. Why way up here, you ask? Perspective, he says, simply. From here, they could see it all. The stirrings, the shiftings, the tilt of a head. The flutter of a hand fanning someone too warm. Every tiny movement, like ripples on water. There's something sacred about it. You can feel it. This wasn't a place for cheering or spectacle. It was a place for noticing, for protecting the invisible moments others didn't think mattered. The lead nap monitor, you learn, wasn't chosen lightly. It wasn't about seniority or even skill. It was about patience, profound patience. The kind that lets you watch a sleeping face and know the exact moment to adjust a cushion. The kind that understood when to intervene and when to let someone drool in peace. That rare talent for reading the theater of slumber in a stadium built for chaos. One such lead monitor was named Callistus, a former basket weaver with no political ties or gladiator history. But he became famous in quiet circles for his uncanny ability to detect a snorer from across the amphitheater. They said he could identify the exact type of snore based on pitch. A high whistle meant dry throat mint sachet required. A low grumble, likely neck angle adjust pillow. A wet gargle, well, that just meant someone brought wine into the sun too early. A quirky tidbit about Callistus. He once invented a signaling system using fluttering ribbons tied to sticks. Each color represented a nap need: blue for breeze, white for silence, green for snack delay. He'd wave the ribbon from the loft, and monitors below would respond like a flock of sleepy birds. The system worked well until a passing dove attacked the blue ribbon midwave, caused a bit of a stir. Historians still argue whether the system was widely adopted or remained localized to this section of the Colosseum. Some believe it was an early ancestor of slumber. Others say it was just a hobby that got out of hand. But one fragment of mosaic from the outer gallery clearly shows a man on a perch with ribbons in both hands. Below him, a family naps peacefully. You lean forward and rest your elbows on your knees. The scene below is soft, now almost delicate. Children lying on their mothers' laps. Elderly men nodding, their chins wobbling toward their chests. Two teenagers pretend to be awake but have clearly surrendered to a sun-dazed doze. The arena itself is being cleared, wooden props dragged out, leftover sand raked smooth. Even the torchbearers, walking slower now, their flames flickering like lullabies. This is when Rome rests, Servius murmurs, and not just physically. For all its power, the empire needed this too. A pause, a breath, a small sliver of time when no decisions were being made, no declarations shouted, no games performed, just the low rumble of someone exhaling through their nose in their sleep. You ask if the monitors ever napped themselves. Oh, of course, Servius says, laughing softly. Usually in shifts. Usually standing up. There's a reason some of us wore the wider belt's extra lumbar support. He stretches, joints popping faintly. One time I nodded off mid-step, woke up mid-sandwich. No idea how. He tells you that during quieter moments, nap monitors would rotate to the loft not just to watch, but to reflect. They'd jot down notes in little journals. Notes not of who slept, but of how they slept. Peacefully, anxiously, curled tightly or sprawled wide, as if each person's posture told a story. As if sleep here, in the heart of spectacle, revealed something truer than cheering ever could. Some of these journals survive. Small leather-bound things with loops for wax pencils. The script inside is slow, gentle, like someone writing while the ink yawned. Third bench, east. Woman twitches when trumpets sound, calms quickly. Boy in green tunic. Dreams maybe. Smiles once. Reading them, it's clear. These monitors weren't just attendants. They were observers of the human soul at rest. You close your eyes, just for a moment, and let the wind brush your face. You hear footsteps below, faint and echoing. A quiet cough, a distant snore, and above it all, the soundless reverence of people sleeping while being watched over not by gods or emperors, but by the quiet guardians of rest. From the watcher's loft, the Colosseum becomes less an arena and more a cradle. And for a moment, you forget the lions, the swords, the senators. You think only of soft snores and warm stone, and a place where even Rome, ever-marching Rome, stopped to dream. Night begins to settle over the Colosseum, the last golden rays, slipping away and leaving cool shadows in their place. You stand now near the ancient entrance tunnels, where the hustle of the day's crowds has quieted into a calm shuffle. Lanterns flicker to life, casting pools of warm light that dance on the rough stone walls, and the murmurs of tired voices soften into whispered goodbyes. This is the after hours, the time when the day's spectacle has folded, and the arena breathes out its last sigh. Servius points down the corridor to a narrow passage where faded frescoes of gladiators and mythical beasts still cling to the cracked walls. This is the domain of the late-shift nap monitors, he says. They had one job: escort the lingering sleepers home safely. You imagine the scene, the crowd thinning, but pockets of dozing citizens caught in the haze of men swaying in their seats, women clutching children fast asleep on their shoulders, and youths slowly folding themselves into the shadows. The late shift monitors moved like shadows themselves, gentle but alert, guiding these drowsy figures away from hazards, the uneven steps, the sudden noises, even the occasional stray animal. The idea of such guardians strikes you as unexpectedly tender for a place so often associated with blood and noise. It's a reminder that beneath the Colosseum's roar was a city that cared, in its own gruff way, for the small things: a safe path home for a weary child, a quiet escort through the maze. Historians still argue whether these late-shift monitors were formal posts or improvised by more experienced nap watchers who simply refused to leave until the last sigh. But accounts from Roman diaries and letters hint at the presence of shadow watchers who became beloved fixtures, recognized by the faint scent of lavender they carried or the soft whistle they used to calm restless sleepers. One curious anecdote involves a monitor known only as Silent Knox. According to a series of letters found in the ruins of a nearby villa, Silent Knox was famed for his ability to lull a half-drunken soldier back to sleep simply by humming an old lullaby. Soldiers in Rome, as you might guess, were not known for their patience, but tales say Silent Knox's calm presence was enough to soothe even the rowdiest of night owls. As you follow Servius through the dim passage, you notice small carved niches built into the walls. Each contains a simple offering: a sprig of rosemary, a smooth pebble, or a folded piece of cloth. These are tokens left by grateful citizens, small thanks for unseen kindnesses. One niche holds a crude carving of a curled figure wrapped in a cloak, eyes peacefully shut. Beneath it, in rough Latin, reads, "For the Keeper of Dreams." It feels less like graffiti and more like a prayer. Nap monitors, you realize, were more than overseers, they were guardians of trust. People gave themselves over to sleep here, vulnerable and exposed, confident that someone was watching, not to punish or prod, but to protect. You pause near an old stone bench and let the quiet sink in. The scent of crushed herbs lingers in the air, mint lavender, and something faintly spicy. It's a sensory reminder that the Colosseum was as much about comfort as it was about conflict. The last few spectators are slowly guided out by shadowy figures who move with practiced grace. You catch a glimpse of a lantern-bearer pausing to adjust a sleeping child's cloak, smoothing the fabric with a gentleness that feels almost sacred. This is the hidden heartbeat of the Colosseum, the pause. After the storm, the quiet between battles. Here, among the ruins and whispers, sleep is honored as a kind of peace treaty, a chance for the weary to close their eyes and dream without fear. Servius turns to you, his voice low and calm. Sometimes, the greatest battles are won not with swords, but with silence. And sometimes, the fiercest guardians are those who watch over dreams. You nod slowly, letting the weight of his words settle. The night wraps around you like a soft blanket, and for a moment, the Colosseum is not an arena of ancient bloodshed but a sanctuary of rest. The Colosseum's stone walls are cool now under the moon's pale light, and the air carries a whisper of dew settling on grass and worn marble. You and Servius tread softly through one of the underground hypogeum tunnels, the maze beneath the arena floor. Once bustling with cages, gladiators, and machinery, but now quiet, except for your footsteps echoing faintly off the damp stones. Servi lowers his voice, a whisper almost lost in the stillness. Here is where the earliest nap monitors first learned their trade, he says, his eyes scanning the shadows. They were originally stagehands and animal keepers, but over time, their roles evolved. You follow his finger toward a carved relief showing two figures, one reclining on a stone slab, the other holding a fan. The inscription is faded but suggests the birth of rest stewardship. Early monitors had to balance the chaos of the underground caged beasts' restless slaves, hauling heavy lifts with the need to protect those rare quiet moments when a gladiator or handler might steal a few minutes of rest. Historians still argue how much power these underground monitors wielded. Some sources say they were little more than foot soldiers, while others credit them with inventing early nap protocols, structured breaks, communal rest areas, and a strict code forbidding loud noises or sudden movements during naps. A quirky detail emerges. Some monitors used a form of scent therapy, burning herbs like rosemary and lavender in small braziers to calm both animals and humans. It's the earliest known example of aromatherapy, decades before modern science caught on. One legend tells of a monitor named Sabina, who was said to lull a particularly fierce lion to sleep with her singing. Whether myth or fact, the story underscores the delicate balance between violence and calm the monitors had to maintain. Moving deeper, you reach a small chamber lined with padded mats and simple cushions, one of the oldest known nap rooms. The stone floor bears impressions from centuries of rest, faint outlines of shoulders and backs pressed into soft fabric. You imagine the whispered conversations, the slow breathing, the sighs of relief from exhaustion. Servius bends to examine. Some faint scratches on the wall, ancient graffiti from a tired gladiator. One day, I sleep longer than a heartbeat. That sentiment, you realize, echoes through every era. The hypogeum monitors were often tasked with mediating tensions, too. Gladiators and handlers sometimes clashed, tempers flared, and a loud quarrel could ruin the fragile peace. The monitors learned to use subtle signals and calming gestures, half nods, slow hand waves to restore quiet. A raised eyebrow could halt an argument. A soft word could redirect anger into laughter. Their work was mostly invisible. Their successes measured not in triumphs but in silences preserved. You pause, tracing your fingers over a set of ancient hinges, remnants of a door long gone. Through it, you imagine faint, sleepy footsteps, muffled voices, and the occasional quiet snore echoing softly in the cavernous tunnel. The night deepens, and you sense the pulse of history wrapped around you like a slow, steady heartbeat. Here, beneath the spectacle, was a world of tenderness, of exhaustion met with care, and vigilance without violence. You rise and follow Servius back toward the arena floor, carrying with you a new appreciation that even in the loudest, most brutal places, there is room for rest, that someone, somewhere, always watched to keep it safe. Dawn creeps slowly over the Colosseum's battered arches as you and Servius descend to the arena floor itself. The sand beneath your feet feels cool and gritty, a stark contrast to the sun-warmed stones you've wandered earlier. This is the heart of the spectacle, the stage where life and death played out, yet also, surprisingly, a place where naps were sacred. Servius gestures toward the scattered remnants of cushions and rugs left behind by spectators. Here, in the open air, the challenge was different. You couldn't rely on shade or curtains. Nap monitors had to be especially vigilant, because the sun's heat and sudden noises threatened even the most devoted sleepers. You watch as a gentle breeze lifts a loose grain of sand, sending it dancing through a shaft of early sunlight. Servius smiles. Some monitors took to carrying small hand fans, made of peacock feathers or painted wood, not only to cool, but to create a quiet rhythm, a kind of lullaby breeze, to soothe the restless. A quirky fact: some of these fans were designed to look like miniature shields, complete with tiny handles shaped like Glady Rome's short swords. They were both functional and symbolic reminders that even in sleep, Romans kept one eye on defense. You learn that nap monitors developed subtle hand signals to communicate across the noisy arena floor. A flick of a wrist might mean too loud. A gentle finger tap adjusts the pillow. Some argue these signals were the first form of sign language. Historians still debate their origin and extent. Servius leans closer and lowers his voice. One legend tells of a monitor who could calm a screaming crowd just by waving a particular fan. The story says that during a moment of chaos, he slowly raised his fan, and the murmurs faded into quiet. Whether true or exaggerated, it speaks to the power of small acts in a place designed for spectacle. You imagine the tireless monitors weaving between benches, dodging falling fruit and spilled wine, always alert to the fragile sleep of their charges. Their eyes scanned for any sign of discomfort or danger, and their hands were ready to steady a stumbling head or brush a stray lock of hair from a brow. As you stroll across the arena sand, you notice faint outlines etched into the dirt marks, left by generations of feet, wheels, and the occasional slip. They seem like footprints of history itself. Servius stops near the arena's center, where a small, worn stone platform stands. This was sometimes used as a resting spot for important spectators, those whose naps were too precious to risk on a bench. You step onto it, feeling the cool hardness beneath your sandals. Nearby, you spot a patch of green Ariane, unexpected cluster of wildflowers growing between stones. It's said that ancient nap monitors sometimes planted herbs here. Rosemary too scent the air and calm restless spirits. Some still believe those plants carry the whispers of thousands of nappers long gone. You take a deep breath, inhaling the mingled scents of dust, herbs, and fading sun. It feels like the very essence of the Colosseum, a place of contrasts, of violence and peace, noise and silence. Servius smiles softly. In the arena, amidst the roar and blood, there was always a place for rest, for those moments when even the mightiest needed to close their eyes and dream. And as you stand there, letting the weight of history settle around you, you realize that the guardians of sleep were as important as the gladiators themselves. Because without rest, even Rome's greatest games would be just noise. The sun has dipped low, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple, and the Colosseum begins to empty for the day's final act. You find yourself near the outer galleries, where statues and carved reliefs tell stories of gods and heroes. But here, in the quieter corners, the stories are of ordinary people, the nap monitors, whose work was largely unseen but deeply felt. Servius points to a series of bas-reliefs showing figures reclining, eyes closed, while others stand watch nearby. These are some of the few artistic tributes to nap monitors, he explains. They were rarely glorified, but respected in their own circles. You study the carvings. One depicts a monitor gently holding a fan, another cradling a small cushion. A third figure appears to be whispering softly to a sleeper, a gesture of comfort rather than authority. Historians still argue about the exact role these figures played in Roman society. Were they considered mere attendants, or did they hold a special status? Some believe that in certain districts, nap monitors formed informal guilds, complete with ceremonies and symbols of office. A quirky detail from one inscription mentions a sleeping club, a social group of elite nap enthusiasts who gathered to share techniques for the perfect doze. Membership required a dedication to quietude and an appreciation for the subtle arts of pillow arrangement and fan waving. Servius shares a story about an ancient festival called the Day of Slumbers, where citizens would dress in soft robes and partake in communal naps, accompanied by soothing music and herbal infusions. Nap monitors would officiate, ensuring the sanctity of the event and gently guiding participants into restful states. The idea seems almost modern, a reminder that even in the busiest empires, people sought moments of pause and peace. You wander toward a small chapel nearby, dedicated not to gods of war but to Hypnos, the god of sleep. It's modest, with simple stone benches and faded frescoes of peaceful night skies. A carved inscription reads, "May your dreams be guarded as well as your waking." Servius sighs. For many, this was a place to honor the gift of rest, especially for those who watched over it daily. You feel a deep calm settle over you as you take in the quiet reverence of this space. The Colosseum, so often seen as a symbol of brutality, reveals itself here as a keeper of rest and renewal. As the evening deepens, you recall the countless moments of gentle vigilance, the whispered signals, the small acts of kindness that made sleep possible amidst chaos, and you realize that nap monitors, with their quiet dedication, left a legacy not in grand monuments or bloody victories, but in the peaceful breaths of those they watched over. Night has fully embraced the Colosseum, the vast amphitheater now a silhouette against a star-studded sky. You and Servius stand on the outer walkways, gazing down at the empty arena floor, its sandy surface cool and still. The roar of the crowd is a distant memory, replaced by the soft chorus of nighttime insects and the occasional rustle of a passing breeze. Servius leans against the stone railing and says quietly. By the time the final echoes faded, the nap monitors were already preparing for the next day. Their work never truly ended. You nod, feeling the weight of that continuity. These guardians of rest existed not just in moments of peace, but as part of a living cycle, watching, tending, and waiting. A quirky tale drifts into your mind. A monitor who, after decades of service, supposedly fell asleep during his final shift. When he woke, he claimed to have dreamt of an eternal Colosseum filled only with sleeping spectators and silent monitors, a place where time moved as slowly as a deep breath. Whether dream or prophecy, the story became a favorite among monitors, symbolizing the peaceful end they all hoped for. Historians still debate the accuracy of many such tales, but they agree on one truth. The legacy of nap monitors is woven into the very stones of the Colosseum. Their presence shaped not only how People rested, but how Rome itself viewed the value of quiet, of stillness, and of care. Servius turns to you and smiles. You've walked their path, seen their tools, heard their stories. Remember, it wasn't just about preventing snoring or nudging a sleeper upright. It was about respect for the body, the mind, and the fragile balance between wakefulness and dreams.